Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's panel discussion on a very important and timely topic, democracy in crisis, challenges and solutions in the modern era. My name is Isaia, and I will be your moderator for this discussion, representing Oxygen for Democracy. This panel is in collaboration with our knowledge partner, the Institute of Studies of Politics and Democracy. Before I introduce you to my panelists, let's welcome Mr. Panayiotis Palates, Commissioner of the Citizens, for a brief keynote speech. Panayiotis, the floor is yours, and thank you very much.
Απολογούμε που δεν μπορώ να μείνω, όντως έτυχε κάτι έκτακτο και ηλυμμένο, οπότε να πρέπει να αποχωρήσω. Οπότε, επιγραμματικά να δώσω εγώ μια εισήγηση στην όλη διαδικασία που συμβαίνει από εχθές, όντως εξαιρετική, για τα δεδομένα της Κύπρου, με συμμετοχή οριζόντια του πολιτικού κόσμου, αλλά και της κοινωνίας των πολιτών. Επειδή το θέμα είναι η δημοκρατία σε κρίση, κατά τη δική μου αντίληψη τουλάχιστον, όντως η δημοκρατία βρίσκεται σε κρίση εδώ και αρκετά χρόνια. Έχουμε ένα πολίτευμα το οποίο βρίσκεται υπό κοινωνική πίεση και αυτό προκύπτει για πολλούς και διάφορους λόγους, όπως είναι φυσικό άλλωστε. Η ερώτηση που μας εστάληκε είναι να επισημάνουμε ποιο θεωρούμε εμείς το βασικό. Δεν μπορείς να εντοπίσεις βασικό ρόλο, λόγο για τον οποίο βρίσκεται σε κρίση η δημοκρατία. Υπάρχουν πάρα πολλοί, γιατί απλούστερα η δημοκρατία είναι μια εξελίξη κοινωνική διαδικασία. Δεν αποτελεί πανάκια. Είναι ένα πολίτευμα το οποίο απαιτεί την κοινωνική συμμετοχή έτσι ώστε να μπορεί να εξελίσσεται. Και εκεί βρίσκω ουσιαστικά εγώ το πρόβλημα της δημοκρατίας σήμερα. Στο ότι δεν εξελίσσεται για έναν και συγκεκριμένο λόγο σε πλανητικό επίπεδο, γιατί το πολιτικό σύστημα επιδιώκει τη σταθερότητα. Επιδιώκει τη σταθερότητα σε βαθμό σταθεροκρατίας. Οπότε δεν της επιτρέπει να εξελίσσεται. Μάλιστα σε μια εποχή η οποία η εξέλιξη, μετά ιδίως την τεχνολογική επανάσταση της περασμένης δεκαετίας, υποχρέωσε τον κόσμο και τον πλανήτη να κινηθεί σε τρομερά γρήγορους ρυθμούς. Οπότε, ένα από τα βασικά προβλήματα της δημοκρατίας μας είναι ότι δεν εξυπηρετεί τις θεμελιώδεις αρχές της, την εξέλιξη και ακολούθως την κοινωνία. Η κοινωνία έχει αναπτυχθεί, έχει διαμορφωθεί και έχει διαμορφώσει νέες επιταγές, τις οποίες η δημοκρατία σήμερα δεν έχει ακόμη βρει τον τρόπο να εξαργυρώσει. Και τι εννοώ. Η συμμετοχικότητα σήμερα αποτελεί το βασικό πυλώνα του πολιτεύματος μας. Κάτι το οποίο δυστυχώς αδυνατούμε, όχι μόνο εμείς ως Κύπρος, αλλά ακόμη και η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση, να ικανοποιήσουμε σε απολύτω βαθμό. Έχουν γίνει προσπάθειες και από την πλευρά μας ως κυβέρνηση έχουμε κάνει κάποιες προσπάθειες και κάποια βήματα, όμως θα χρειαστούν καινοτόμες λύσεις, έτσι ώστε ο πολίτης να έρθει κοντά στην εξουσία και κυρίως εκεί που παίρνονται οι αποφάσεις για να μπορέσει να νιώσει ξανά χρήσιμος και ωφέλιμος για το κοινωνικό σύνολο. Οι λόγοι που η δημοκρατία μας βρίσκεται σε κρίση, λοιπόν, πέρα από τους προφανείς, τη διαφθορά του πολιτικού συστήματος, την οικονομική ανισότητα, το ότι δείχνει μια ανικανότητα να προσαρμοστεί στις πολυεθνικές πλέον κοινωνίες και κατ' επέκταση δημοκρατίες, είναι η βασική ανικανότητά της να εξελιχθεί μαζί με την κοινωνία. Υπάρχουν τρόποι και εμείς σαν κράτος πρέπει να εκμεταλλευτούμε την τεχνολογία έτσι ώστε ο πολίτης να αποκτήσει βήμα άμεσα εκεί που παίρνονται οι αποφάσεις. Πρέπει να δημιουργήσουμε συνθήκες, λοιπόν, διάχυσης της δημοκρατίας. Πρέπει ο κάθε πολίτης να μπορεί, για θέματα που τον αφορούν, για θέματα τα οποία τον απασχολούν στην καθημερινότητα του, να έχει άποψη και να διαμορφώνει. Προφανώς τα πολιτικά κόμματα έχουν τον ρόλο αυτόν, όμως και το ίδιο το κράτος πρέπει να αναπτύξει διάφορους θεσμούς και εργαλεία, έτσι ώστε ο πολίτης να μπορεί απευθείας να απευθύνεται, ιδίως στην εκτελεστική εξουσία, την οποία και αντιπροσωπεύουμε. Ποια είναι τα εργαλεία. Πρώτα απ' όλα είναι νομοθεσίες, νομοθετική πρωτοβουλία πολιτών που εφαρμόζεται στην Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση από το 2012. Κατά την άποψή μου πάλι όχι απόλυτα επιτυχημένα. Θα πρέπει άμεσα να εφαρμοστεί, γι' αυτό έχουμε προχωρήσει στην κατάθεση του νομοσχεδίου. Ελέγχεται αυτή τη στιγμή νομοτεχνικά και να προχωρήσουμε να καταθέσουμε στη Βουλή. Η προσπάθεια του κ. Θεοπέμπτου να θεσμοθετηθεί νομοθετικά με την πρόταση νόμου η δημόσια διαβούλευση επίσης είναι ένα βήμα θετικό και το στηρίζουμε, είμαστε σε συνεργασία μαζί με τον βουλευτή. Κάποια άλλα εργαλεία τα οποία έχουμε εφαρμόσει πρόσφατα, όπως είναι το έκφραση, όπως είναι η φωνή του πολίτη, επαναλαμβάνω, δεν αποτελούν Παναγιά, απλώς ουσιαστικά δίνουν κάποιες διόδους προς τον πολίτη να εκφράσει την άποψή του και οφείλουμε να βρούμε τρόπους περαιτέρω ανάπτυξης. Ίσως μια λύση που θα εξετάσουμε άμεσα είναι το να δημιουργηθεί πλατφόρμα πιο άμεσης δημόσιας διαβούλευσης σε διάφορα θέματα. Υπάρχουν ήδη αρκετά μοντέλα ανά το παγκόσμιο, οπότε μπορούμε να εξετάσουμε την περίπτωση να εφαρμόσουμε και ένα στην Κύπρο. Η κυβέρνηση μας επίσης έχει προχωρήσει στη μείωση του ηλικιακού ορίου, σε πρόταση για μείωση του ηλικιακού ορίου, την αυτόματη εγγραφή στους εκλογικούς καταλόγους, που είναι πάλι κάποια θετικά βήματα, έτσι ώστε ο κόσμος να συμμετέχει κάπως περισσότερο. Όμως γενικά, για να μην κουράζομαι με το τι έχει γίνει τεχνικά, η δημοκρατία στηρίζεται στους πολίτες. Εάν οι πολίτες δεν αντιλαμβάνονται τη σημασία της δημοκρατίας, αυτό σημαίνει ότι η ίδια η πολιτική ηγεσία, τα κόμματα, η εκτελεστική εξουσία έχουν αποτύχει. Σε μια περίοδο όπου ο λαϊκισμός τείνει να γίνει κανόνας και μάλιστα επιθετικός κανόνας, σε μια περίοδο που τα μέσα κοινωνικής δικτύωσης αποτελούν πεδίο δόξης για fake news και παραπληροφόρηση, οφείλουμε ως πολιτικός κόσμος να είμαστε πιο σταθεροί και ακόμη και πιο επιθετικοί απέναντι σε οποιαδήποτε μορφή λαϊκισμού, έτσι ώστε να βοηθήσουμε την κοινωνία την ίδια να αντιληφθεί και τη χρησιμότητα της και το όφελος που θα έχει ως προς τη συμμετοχή της στα πολιτικά δρόμενα. Ευχαριστώ πολύ. Ξανά απολογούμε για το ότι πρέπει να φύγω. Ευχαριστώ πολύ για την προσκλήση.
Thank you very much, Mr. Palates, Commissioner for the Citizen of the Republic of Cyprus. So, let me now introduce you to our panelists. First, we have Mr. Nikitas Hatzimihail, Professor of Private Law, Comparative Law and Legal History Department of Law, Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Education and Social Sciences of University of Cyprus, and also representative of the Institute for Study and Politics for Democracy. Also have with us Mr. Marcel Schepp, which is an advisor for international party dialogue at the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung. I'm telling this right?
Stiftung, but you can say foundation. That's the German word for foundation.
Thank you very much. And of course, Mrs. Kola, Vice President of the Cyprus Green Citizens Cooperation and former President of the Cyprus Youth Council. And also, last but not least, we have online with us Mrs. Valéria Silva, Senior Legal and Policy Advisor in AI Governance. So today's discussion will address some of the most pressing and challenges of democracy, including the rise of political polarization, the erosion of democracy, and many other issues that we're going to discuss today. After we hear from our panelists, we will open the floor for some questions from the audience and some closing remarks from you guys. So without further ado, let me just continue or move on to my first general question, which is going to be the same for each one of the panelists. And the question is the following. What do you see as the most significant threat to democracy today, and what concrete steps can be taken to strengthen democratic governments and restore public confidence? I will start with Mr. Nikitas Hatzimihail, if you could please.
Yes. So, thank you, George. The easy answer in one word is trust. The loss of trust. It's so easy and so obvious that we have to go further, and I will try to avoid using the word for the next 5 minutes. And a reason is because everything is going to revolve around that, and the other one is because often the pursuit of trust has been used, as you've heard, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, I'm a comparative law and a legal historian, which is both good and bad. So in history especially, we've seen quite too often instances where democratic legitimacy is being sought to legitimate existing situations or to legitimate imposed situations. Consider, for example, the Roman Republic became empire. When did Rome cease to be a democracy in the way we understand it right now? And when did Rome actually cease to be a republic or a democratia in the sense that we also mean the state? The easy answer is that Rome ceased to be a democracy at some point in the 1st century BC, but even the constitutional arrangements started changing officially in the 3rd century AD. And in a way, until the very end of Byzantium, there was sort of elections of the emperors, and if you go to the Holy Roman Empire, you had elections of the emperor until essentially the abolition of the Holy Roman Empire in 1806. So you had this kind of, and they were every year, especially during Augustus, they were using these democratic rites or rituals in order to legitimate a state of affairs that had changed. Even the stories we know about Caligula making his horse and a senator, it was kind of part of this game of sort of using and abusing the idea of democracy and democratic participation legitimacy. So this is the thing here, that very, very often, so I confess I'm a bit afraid sometimes. I mean, we need to strengthen institutions, strengthen participation, that sometimes participation becomes a way to actually undermine effective democracy or effective democratic governance. Consider how, well, Mr. Pedikis does not have this problem in the ecology, but the biggest parties and the biggest parliaments essentially have been in states that were not especially democratic. For example, the Congress of the Peoples of the Soviet Union. It was like this huge thing. Some of us might still remember it, the others were too young for this. And the other situation was the major political parties where you have this kind of central committees of over 1,000 members. So you have a party has 10,000 members and about 1,000 of them in central committees. Experience shows that the more members you have in the central committee, the less actual discussion happens in the central committee, at least my experience from the outside. And yes, I've been a central committee member once in a party. So the thing is, we need to consider why, and we need to consider the terms. The difference between democracy, liberalism, and republicanism that very often gets lost, not just in the Greek discussion, but generally when we speak about democracy. And these are connected but different ideas. As to the why, we'll say two reasons: fragmentation and addiction to easy short answers. And the third one that comes from the thing. Fragmentation. We have separate news enclaves, even when we consider the debate in the US, the vice presidential debate. The Republicans who watched it saw as different, will keep a different thing than the Democrats. The Democrats will keep J.D. Vance's last answer about the election. The Republicans, especially the moderate Republicans who are looking for an excuse to vote Trump-Vance, will say, well, you see, Vance is not as crazy or as weird as we thought he was. So even when they had the same source, they are receiving it, they are perceiving it separately, and this source is being filtered through separate media. Fox News is going to portray a very different image than MSNBC, for example. And this is a common thing. And so this fragmentation is like, it's not without historical precedents, but it's also, but it is a clear fragmentation. Social media make it even worse. We've had recent examples. We can take the war in Gaza, where essentially where you had a generational chasm in the US, depending on which medium they were using, algorithm notwithstanding. And we also do things here. Sort of, I'm personally, if I think I consume hours of news every day, primarily not in Greek, but if I actually think about what I consume, all of it is from a certain point of view or set of points of views. And this is even more common with people who are not involved daily. Social media has made a huge impact. There are social psychologists have written how essentially it's rewired teenagers' brains. So the new great idea of sort of like our politicians is to reduce like the voting age at 17 from 18. I'm not in favor, I must say. I had horizontal suffrage before, and at the same time, we have a generation that was kind of educated in a very polarized environment. Then go to the second one, the addiction to easy short answers. And this has two legs. On the one hand, you have this addiction to monocausality. One thing explains everything. Joke that sometimes conspiracy theorists are the true optimists, because essentially it's much nicer to believe that one group rules the world than to actually realize it's a total mess and no one knows what's happening. And so monocausality is a natural response of like a human, including yours truly, but it has its issues, especially as the world becomes more and more and more complex. And so we have this kind of thing, which sounds like a paradox, but is not necessarily. That in a way, our world becomes even more complex. Even like the physics today is not the physics of sort of my youth, for example. We have quantum physics, and then quantum, go further, we discuss about whether even, and at the same time, we look for something simple. Just one simple thing we can understand. And on top of this, you have the idea that the attention, we complain about the youth, but also even ourselves, we get more, we are getting more into this easy bites. It's like food where you don't need to actually separate like the bone or the fat from the meat. You just have clean meat, but the clean meat is actually processed meat, so it's not even real meat. And so we receive our information from TikTok or from YouTube, and we see even within YouTube, we will tend to take easier, shorter videos than actually the longer video. We might depend, so we want like, and then we end up with a situation like often we joke that in the US, you could listen to 20 minutes about the matter and not really figure out what really happened. And this is becoming more and more, we train more journalists, but our journalists are less well educated. And goes to the third part of this, the populism with a dash between pop and eulism. Not the populism like laicismos, but two things, the cult of the expert, the idea that if you're an expert in something, you can be an expert in everything. Also, sometimes we tend to underestimate the complexity in scientific judgments, and the pandemic offers a lot of, the pandemic is a great example, both in the cult of the expert, and also in the opposite, which everyone's an expert. So I do my own research, and then it's like that, and then it's, and this kind of create, this is the complex situation there. There are no easy solutions, it's like that.
Thank you very much. Marcel, can we have your input as well?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. Very hard to cover more ground after you did it so eloquently, Professor, but a lot of things to take from that. I mean, I believe that the threat to democracy is a very different thing in very different places. I mean, the worst case is war. It's outright violence. We think of Ukraine. We think of places like Venezuela. It's a threat of authoritarianism, repression, and so forth. Foreign influence, populism, polarization. But I think we want to talk from a place from within democracies, what we can change inside those democracies, what we can do ourselves. And I think what has stunned most of us in established democracies in the last years is what threats have occurred in consolidated spaces. The US is an example which I think is quoted most often. And in my point of view, the biggest threat in those places is actually disinterest. And not disinterest in policies, and not disinterest in debate. In fact, you could even make the point that there's way more interest for young people. I mean, arguably I can speak more, for example, from Germany or Central Europe, but you had those big climate demonstration, Fridays for Future. You could even make the painful point that the surge in left-wing or right-wing populism is an expression of more participation. It's just not participation which in many times we would deem democratic, but it is an expression of interest. What I mean is disinterest actually in the established institutions of democracy. Again, I can of course draw more from the examples of Germany, but I think that goes for many democracies. Very few people nowadays want to stand for office. Very few people want to work even in local government administrations. We want to, that's of course my topic especially, want to join political parties. And I think it's that disconnect which we have to address. The previous panel, which is part of an answer to the question that you were asking, I think the lady, the professor, finished with saying political parties have not been responsive to the needs of people. And I would agree to that to some extent, but I think also that maybe because of the logic how social media and how also civil society works, it's easier to express your interest in a more general or in a more single issue-based way on a social media platform through activism, which is very laudable. And don't misunderstand me, I don't want to discredit that, than to get into the complexity of a political party or a political office where, and that's, I think, the link between the easy answers and the complex solutions. I mean, the conundrum for any serious politician is that he wants to speak to all of you in the room, but you all have different opinions, credibly so. I mean, you're entitled, you should have different opinions, but for the politician to convince you, he or she has to have a message to address all those opinions. And then at the end, I'm simplifying here, it's like, okay, you all talk the same. It's like, yeah, because that's probably a middle ground. Yeah, I think, but I would leave that maybe for the second part of the discussion. We should be aware when discussing democracy that the state, the nation state, reflects us as a society, and political parties and governments do reflect our opinions. So we are the powerful ones in democracy.
Thank you very much, Marcel. Maria?
First of all, I would like to thank as well the Oxygen for Democracy for the invitation. And this time, I mean, the 5th time of the Cyprus Forum, is a great opportunity to have invited and be able to participate as political parties. So thank you again for the invitation. So I'm not going to repeat what my co-panelists already said. I will focus on a few other threats that we identify concerning democracy nowadays. First of all, fake news, misinformation and disinformation. They are very important in order to tackle actually what not it's only generated by democracy and the lack of it in some sort of sense, but in case of war, as it was mentioned, the times that we have public disruption, fake news, we see that they arise and we have an issue. Misinformation and disinformation, two different forms of fake news that we need to tackle. The ones that they are misleading because they are generated news, and the other ones that they are intended to mislead the public opinion and generally the opinions of people. Both of them, misinformation and disinformation, they lead to populism without the dash, if I may joke here. So, yeah, we have this form of, again, democracy. It's part of it. We don't embrace it, but it's there. So we have populism arising because of fake news. And what comes to the end of fake news is the lack of critical thinking. We don't have the training, the education, the information, the capacity, let's say, to have critical thinking. And that's actually the end of this small chain I tried to present now. That is basically the fact that we cannot judge and be able to filter what we hear, the information we get, and what we actually want to transfer to the rest of the public. Because if I hear something and I don't fact check it, if I don't filter it, then I will say it to someone else, and then the information carries on. So that's why we have the misinformation and disinformation, even without the intention. Then after that, my second point will be corruption. I mean, who doesn't identify corruption nowadays across the universe, if I may say, not even the globe. And then corruption leads to the lack of transparency. If you have transparency, then you might identify cases of corruption. Or the corruption might be a bit less. But when you don't have transparency, corruption arises and it gets bigger. This bubble of corruption creates disruption to the public, disruption to the economy, disruption to democracy, and even to the opinions of people, because they don't understand, we fail to understand what is happening behind the situations that they bring corruption. So we go back to my first point, that it is the lack of critical thinking. If we cannot identify when a situation leads to corruption, where corruption is hidden because it's not right in front of our faces most of the times, we then lack on transparency. And I will conclude to that, and we'll say the rest later on.
Thank you very much, Maria. And now we're moving to our online panelist, Valéria. If you can hear us, can give her your inputs and first thoughts on. Yes, we can hear you. So perfect. If you can give us your first thoughts.
Yes, I also focus, as Maria Kola, in the threats to democracy, and I think that each of us has been thinking about threats from the perspective of our area. So actually, for me, the main question is also related to disinformation. First, because I work with digital policy, and second, because misinformation, disinformation, we're going to number one short-term break in the 2024 Global Risks Report of the World Economic Forum. So going back quickly, like in time, when the inception of the internet, it was conceived to connect people and to provide new ways of communication. And if we fast forward to 2024, we see the same internet as a platform to disseminate polarization and discourse. This space is now controlled by a few online platforms. They use algorithms to target users with specific contents. And this has led to the reconfiguration of attention allocation by the users, and also the reconfiguration of information flow. And how does this scenario promote disinformation? First, through the use of recommendation algorithms by social media, because it amplifies content that promotes the highest level of engagement. And the problem is that the content that does it is actually the one that is most harmful, so such as political polarizing speech and disinformation. And second, because the advent of artificial intelligence brought major issues scaling the volume of disinformation due to both, first, the spread of dubious content as a result of automation, and second, the production of dubious content, such as video, text, and voice deepfakes through the use of generative AI. So as a result, there is an erosion of democracy. The more polluted the information ecosystem becomes, the harder it is to find reliable sources of information, and the harder it is to trust reliable sources available. So the UN General Secretary, Antonio Guterres, he calls it an existential risk to humanity. So these are my first thoughts, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Valéria. Now we're going to move on to some more specific questions for our panelists. I will start first with Mr. Hatzimihail. So in many cases of democratic regression, we see that the rule of law is undermined. From a legal perspective, how can we safeguard the rule of law in the face of rising populism and executive overreach? What legal frameworks or mechanisms should be strengthened to protect the democratic institutions?
I'm going to, was tempted to refer you to the volume we'll be publishing with the Institute, based on the conference, like in January, and sort of edited by Dr. Foukaidis. I'm not going to give you solutions, I'm going to make a few general remarks. A couple of them are responding to the... So lawyers have this tendency to be, and the way lawyers are being perceived by non-lawyers is that we navigate in this hill and the hurry of this, of either we think we have the solution, or we think it's not our job is just to implement what others think. And the same goes on the outside. I've seen in the university, I've seen when I follow sort of like how politicians work. So either a sense that the lawyer says something and that's it, and you don't even look what is behind what the lawyer says, or the idea is we decide something, you should do it. We have to navigate this, and we have to be interdisciplinary in a way and like think, and there are again no easy solutions. I'm sitting next to someone from the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, and Konrad-Adenauer was like he was not the father, but he was the embodiment of the idea of militant, born the militant democracy, which was a great idea in its time, and we see also its limits today, in a way. And again, it was a great idea for Germany in specific situations, etc. And also something we forget, speaking of Konrad-Adenauer, that Adenauer gave his example. So very often, we speak about critical thinking, we speak about that, we try to legislate behavior. Sometimes we have so-called liberals, I'm not speaking to Maria, so-called liberals acting like Maoists. So have blue Maoists, green Maoists, like red Maoists, like pink Maoists. So we're all Maoists. Maoists are not Maoists right now. They have like, they're more into imperial models. But the idea is that leading by example is something that's so often lost. And essentially, and you see that the grand, mostly men, some women, who built the post-war Europe or the post-war European miracle were people who led by example. And Adenauer is an emblematic figure. We shouldn't talk about how exactly what he did before and after the war. We can speak about like de Gaulle in some extent, Ben-Gurion. But Adenauer is the emblematic thing. So the example is important. The second reason why I'm a bit, and it's true that we need to consider different situations, things that work, do not work. An example is like how in Greece in 1960, Karamanlis wanted to adopt the German constitutional court model in order to be able to bring the communists back into power in control, not just like as they were, sort of, and this failed. In 1974, things were different, probably too late. So things are different even in the same context 10 years later, 15 years later. And this is often forgotten by lawyers and politicians alike. An example of how the legal intervention can work, but also can have an unintended consequence, is the idea of campaign finance reform. And I spoke about corruption. Corruption is a thing. I'm not going to what the word meant, that corruption meant something like that. Had a very metaphysical or theoretical function, not just what we mean about corruption. But what I cannot fail by notice is how very often the efforts to promote transparency, which is like something we can agree is a good absolute value, are leading to more bureaucracy, and more bureaucracy leads to more corruption. And the motherland of Greece is a very good example, because much of what has happened to Greece is due to two things. One is that every time the administration was being reconstructed, something happened and they went again back to the drawing board. They used to have, administration which is sort of like very efficient and very... And the other one, in the effort to control, quote, corruption and impose transparency, they created very complicated processes that actually lead to more opportunities for different ways of corruption. So it's a very good value, but very often and campaign finance reform, the unintended consequence also. Take the US. Campaign finance reform was a big, when I was a graduate student, was a very big thing, and finally, bipartisan McCain-Feingold, they achieved that. What has happened today in the US is a result of campaign finance reform. In this sense, also, what has happened in the US is a result of too much democracy in the parties. What do I mean? And too much democracy is not necessarily democracy, because right now what happens in the US is that the people who dictate their candidates are the vested interests or the very fanatic people. So you get the situation where 80% of the public or 70% of the public agrees to a common ground in the center, but the people who elect the candidates of the two main parties are people who are representing the 20%, not even the 30%, the extremes. And then the 80 or 70% is called to choose between the two lesser evils. And this is the big problem, how to prevent this. And the second thing is, as the parties were weakened, people like Trump, who was not even a Republican 10, 15 years ago, really, took over a party. I mean, for my generation, it's amazing what happened, because people who were thrown out of their own party, their parents' party, it's like by someone who was not even their beliefs. It's not even evolved beliefs. He just came from the outside. And what is happening is that the reform to take big money out of politics has actually led to people catering to the micro campaign donations. So if I'm sort of elaborating, if I say something crazy, I'm going to collect a lot of $5 donations. So reforms that were really good, and I believe they were good, actually has happened to do the thing here. Now, transparency is very useful in campaign finance, in party finance, because many of the problems, including very often examples of political corruption, there are politicians who just use money for lavish lifestyles, but very often politicians collect money for campaigns and things like that. So if you make it open, you might prevent the worst parts of that. So this is the kind of thing. So it's just something where it requires complication. And I feel that too much of the public discussion about corruption, anti-corruption, is just too simplistic. It's like, oh, yeah. So that's my thing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hatzimihail. Now moving back to Marcel. So political parties have been facing significant challenges, including declining membership and public distrust. In your work on party modernization, what strategies have you been successfully used for political parties and restore their relevance in modern democracies? And also, can modernization really help parties combat democratic backsliding?
I think they need to modernize to be relevant in politics. So, and I don't think, I think it's quite natural from what I said before that we're having more of a discourse on civic engagement, on deliberative democracy. What I disagree with is that deliberative democracy and citizen councils would be an alternative, simply for the fact that I think you should involve citizens more, but if you ask yourself as a citizen, there is a reason for representative democracy for how much you want to decide yourself. You know, you can draw from the Swiss model where you have probably every 2 weeks on a local level you have a decision. And I spoke to someone yesterday who lives in Switzerland. He said, but oftentimes people don't choose to go there because exactly that doesn't concern me, and I trust my fellow citizens to vote on that. I maybe go for the one in the next year. So I think that's complementary. What I think political parties can and should do, and to some extent have done also, which links up on your very fair point about transparency, is I think they need to open up, especially when they are perceived as closed, and of course they vary in degrees. They need to establish a good system of intra-party democracy, first also for their own members, because if you take the step of joining a party, but then you end up in the frustration of not being able to make a difference, that frustrates your own members. And again, as a complement also to citizen engagement, in essence, if you take away all normative context, ideology about parties, we go maybe to big countries like India or Brazil, parties are participation machines. They're just a very good tool so far to organize a lot of people's interests. That's the basic idea. And I think in essence you get better policies if you organize those people in a way that all of them have a feeling that they have an influence. There are tools for that, but I don't want to digress into that. The second part is parties need to reach out, and I drew that from a very, very, I think, learning I had 3 or 4 years ago when I started this position. I was part of was an expert, so to speak. I don't like that word, but I could speak to a board meeting of a local party council, and there was one elderly lady, a party member for 50 years, and she said, you know, I'm very involved, and I used to do all these meetings, and I wondered, it was interesting topics, we had coffee and all, but nobody came. And then I realized is that people are interested, but the moment they have to go to a party, they have a feeling it's partisan. So what I realized is, like, instead of me calling them to us, I just went to wherever they were. I went to civil society organizations, I went to churches, to unions, whether it was of my opinion or not. But when I said my opinion, I said, I'm from that party and that is my opinion. And she said that people started appreciating that. It's like, you're reaching out, you know, you're not that close space where we have to come to, but you're actually coming to us. So I do have 2 more items, but I don't want to take too much of the floor. So
thank you very much. Maybe we could come up with this. I personally have a lot of questions about how parties could move on and try to attract more people, because I totally believe that even though we have a lot of problems, political parties are still a vital component of representative democracy. So we will need to enhance them and keep them relevant.
And sorry if I not want to interrupt you, but there's one observation, again, that's drawing from the German examples, but there was political parties are losing members, and yes, they are, but look at the ones that are successful, they are gaining members. So, I mean, currently speaking is a little tough, because, but I think 2 years ago, the Green Party and, unfortunately, the far-right party, they had a member growth, because in the perception of those who were interested in their politics, they were successful. So that's also part of the story. You know?
You're totally right. So moving on to Maria. Maria, youth participation is critical to the future of democracy, yet young people often feel disengaged from traditional politics. What are the main barriers to youth engagement in democratic process today, and what strategies or reforms can be implemented to inspire or involve younger generation more effectively in the, in the policy making?
So, starting from the first part of your question about the main barriers to youth engagement in democratic processes. They are outdated, first of all. Second of all, is that also myself, as being here today representing a political party, I do and I understand that usually political parties we have a perception of one size fits them all. The same goes to the people. People believe that all the political parties, we are the same. If one is corrupted, then the rest of them, they are corrupted. If one is involved in scandals, then the rest of them, they should be, they are political parties. Political parties, they are not the evil group of our communities and our countries, etc. The second reason why, the second barrier, let's say, why the youth is not engaged so much in these democratic processes is that because we don't feel represented. And actually, young people, they are not represented. What is the average age of our elected people in the parliament? We are having just 56 people, and the average is over 40, because the youngest, I think, is 28 from the far right. So the rest of the people, apart from the people who have voted other parties apart from the far right, they are not represented per se from the politicians that they are already in office. And that goes also to the local authorities, and that goes even to the European elections, even though the last European elections, they are a completely different discussion. We should have held a panel on that only. And then concerning again the youth, as it was the question, the National Youth Council's recognition. Lots of the countries across Europe, let's say just Europe, we don't have the official recognition from the government concerning the National Youth Councils. In Cyprus, it is a Cyprus Youth Council, or Συμβούλιο Νεολαίας Κύπρου in Greek, I don't remember the one in Turkish, apologies, who is representing the voice of young people across Cyprus, internally and externally. Oxygen for Democracy is one of the member organizations of the Cyprus Youth Council, and they do know firsthand the work that the National Youth Council does and what it can offer to not only its member organizations, but also to the youth among the island. And another 2 points of the first part of the question is the lack of trust concerning, like, coming again, viewing the political parties and what we get as young people, because, I mean, come on, change needs time. You put a word forward through any channel, let's say for a bill to be voted in the parliament, but it takes time, not only for to discuss it, I forgot the word. Consultation, thank you. Not only for consultation period, but also for the bill to go and be reviewed, be legally binded from all sides, etc. So change needs time. The example that I use mostly on this point, this aspect, is the youth guarantee. It was something that it was discussed firstly when Cyprus held the presidency of the EU Council in 2012, and it got into, it got voted until 2016, and then in 2020 we had the first review in order to see how it was implemented in the member states of the European Union and how we could actually use it further on and how we could reform it. So change needs time. These days, we do have the youth guarantee in a completely different way, at least in Cyprus, of how it was discussed and then voted at the EU stage. And then the most important, most probably, of this point is that we feel that we usually don't have the space within the political scene to be heard and to be seen, because some other people, mainly older than us, and a critical point that it was referred previously from Mr. Nikitas about it is a male-dominant situation, so we don't feel that we do have the space to actually be seen and be heard. And very quickly on the strategies or reforms to be implemented to inspire and involve the younger generations is that make politics simpler. Don't expect from people to come to you, you go and talk to them. That's a very important point. And of course, because we are talking about young people, we are not everyone, we are hanged on this and social media platforms and everything. We come to forums like this, we come to discussions, we hear you, but we need to speak the language of young people. And it's not different. We don't use these huge words, difficult to understand, that they need 3 paragraphs more to be elaborated and to be understood. I'm talking as a young person who is already involved, and I say in quotes, very burnt probably from Cyprus political scene. But believe me, if we do have hope, if we find, and this is what I tend to say to young people, when you find your scope, when you find something you're very passionate about, you will follow it, you will go to discussions, you will post on social media, you will learn about it, and then you will be ready not to just be heard and just be seen, but you will be ready to be out there, because the youth is not the future. We are here, we are saying out loud our opinions, and we just want the seat on the table.
Thank you very much, Maria. I have a small question here, you know. I mean, I totally agree with everything you said regarding change needs time, and also that policy should be more simple, I mean, to be more understandable from everyone. But shall we sacrifice political integrity in order to be likable or more understandable to everyday citizens in the public in general? And I'm saying that because I have in mind TikTok or Instagram or whatever. I mean, in the last European elections, we saw many politicians using TikTok, doing videos that are not political per se. Mm-hmm. And the question is, do we want this change for policymakers or political parties? Or shall we find, I don't know, a middle line? Because personally, I don't think that we should go there and stay there. I do think that political parties have some very good role to play, but I'm not sure if they totally needs to go to, you know, I'm not saying destroy the traditional parties, but I mean, you get the point and you can answer.
Very quickly, because we have also Silva and the questions from the public. No, I'm not saying that we need to get everything to the ground and burn them. No, we just need to use simpler language. We need to simplify, or as we used to say for other processes, we need to just sexify it a bit, if I'm allowed to say that, for politics. So I understand, and we need to understand, political parties, we need to understand that we are living in the era of social media, the era of public image, etc. Let's not go to the other end of the line of going to just for the image and vague words and everything. But we need to hear what the public needs and how we can pass on the message, in the sense that we've tried it, actual traditional politics for the last many years. So how we can differentiate, how can we make the difference by using simpler language and useful tools.
Thank you very much, Maria. And now moving to Valéria again. Valéria, digital technologies, including AI, have been both a tool and a challenge for democratic system. How the European Union addressing the challenges posed by the digital technology, particularly with regards of misinformation, privacy, and political manipulation? Additionally, how do you see the Digital Services Act influencing our daily lives, and what shape and how is shaping democracy in the near future?
Okay, so thank you for the question. George, this question actually taps in the second part of your first question, what are the concrete steps to strengthen democratic governance? So Europe is actually regulating the information generated by algorithm manipulation mainly through the Digital Services Act. It was published in 2022, so it was applied, it was already, like, the EU could check the level of efficacy in the last European elections of June. Then there is a new layer that will come when the need of protection against disinformation, I mean, when the EU AI Act comes into force. This has just been published now in July. It will take at least half a year for prohibited risks, and then there will be like 1 year for it to come into force for generative AI, and we will see, I will explain briefly how this is going to play. So starting with the Digital Services Act, so DSA, is the first EU legislation that introduces legal obligations to online providers to fight disinformation and illegal content, and it also establishes liability in the case of non-fulfillment of these obligations. And the obligations are imposed as a fund. So if you're all providers of intermediary services, they are online providers, they are subject to that, but if they have if you go further, and they are also classified as online hosting services, they have extra obligations. If you go further and they are classified as online platforms or search engines, they have additional obligations and so on and so forth. So the obligation to fight with information in the DSA specifically to fight disinformation comes in two ways. One, as illegal content. So this obligation is imposed upon all online intermediaries by the DSA. And according to the DSA, if this information is considered to be legal, but this is determined by the legislation of each European country, so it varies. All the online intermediaries, including online platforms, they are obliged to take action to remove it. Otherwise, they are subject to administrative fines. And the obligation to fight disinformation with the DSA also arises for socially harmful content. These are not the baseline obligations, these are obligations, additional obligations that are imposed to very large online platforms or very large online search engines. So they are obliged to carry risk assessment of systemic risks and to implement measures to mitigate the systemic risks. Example, by removing it, labeling with warnings, providing fact-check information, etc. Each platform will determine how to do it. And when we talk about the dialogue between the DSA and the AI Act, the AI Act will come to reinforce the goals of the DSA, among other provisions, of course. But in this aspect, since the EU AI Act has a 4-tiered risk approach, it starts from unacceptable risk, which are prohibited, and here there is a prohibition of manipulation of the behavior of individuals and groups to distort and impair decision-making, resulting in significant harm. So there will be a reinforcement of the objectives of the DSA. The second level is high risk. So those are not prohibited, but they are subject to risk and quality management requirements by the providers of AI systems. And this will include actually AI systems that influence selection outcomes or voting behavior. So here is a concern by the EU to actually cover AI and not leave it outside of the set of regulations. And the third category will include AI systems with risks that require transparency mitigation measures only. So this will apply to all general purpose AI systems. And deepfakes, as such, they must be clearly labeled. So this is another measure to mitigate disinformation. I will stop here because this is in a nutshell the latest and most relevant initiatives by the EU, and feel free to ask more questions.
Thank you very much, Valéria. I mean, this Digital Service Act, it's definitely going to change how we perceive, everyday reality in digital platforms. I can tell you for sure the official conversation in Cyprus, at least, hasn't started yet. Hopefully it will start soon. And I can't wait to see how are we going to implement this here. So we have 15 minutes left. I will open now the floor for questions from the audience. Please feel free to make your questions in Greek if you want to, and I will briefly, make a translation. So I will rise up as a good moderator and hand the microphone.
My name is Ksenia Mohortova. I'm a president of Community of Ukrainian Cypriot Friendship. I have a question regarding disinformation and false news. For me, it's like an epidemic that is coming all over the world, but we don't treat it as we treated COVID, for example. During COVID, it was a common threat for everyone, and we vaccinated people. It was not really democratic, but it helped to save a lot of lives. Why don't we take some similar measures. I don't know, maybe obligatory courses on informational security or how to debunk disinformation or whatever, because we're talking a lot about how we can treat children of critical thinking and all this kind of stuff, but it's a very long-term investment into children. It will pay off like years since they will become voters. What should we do to the current voters? Because in the days they went to school, there was not such a threat. They didn't know, they're not prepared to tackle it. And maybe we should take measures to teach people to do it. Sorry.
Anyone else? Questions for the panel? If not, maybe I'll give my phone, because I have a question. So, does any of you want to answer to the first question we've got from the audience? Any of you? I mean, and you're referring to misinformation, basically. Anyone wants to add something? Yes.
I mean, on Xenia's question. Or?
Valéria, would you like to add something, please? We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just start by saying that one thing that is very immediate is the DSA, because actually after evaluating the results of the European election, the initial assessment by the Commission was that there were no major or systemic incidents that disrupted the conduct of the elections. This is not enough. This is far from enough. I agree with you. In terms of education, I know it takes time. It has to be done, like development of actually classes or media literacy. And I think you're referring to Finland's example. They started in the school with a curriculum to actually enhance media literacy and actually fight fake news. And they try to make the children become fact checkers. So they're always checking whether it's a fake or a fact that they receive, and also to identify what are the methods used to actually use the fake profiles or the fake content and try to manipulate behavior. This can be done for adults, so I don't see a problem to that. The issues like how to scale that in a way, I guess that's maybe your question as well. How can we scale this in a proportion that will reach the entire population? And that either becomes I don't know how to make it mandatory to individuals in a society outside of a course, of a work environment, if they're not in any of this. But those are my thoughts.
Thank you very much, Valéria. Now we're going... yes, please.
If I may add to that, I think Maria touched on that before, why misinformation, disinformation has taken us so by surprise. Because we came with the promise of the internet delivering almost limitless information ability in the most positive sense. And so I think it has somewhat, or it definitely has taken us by surprise. Let's say my personal or professional feeling, more of a hunch, is that we've kind of crossed that arc, because if you look at the same time of how elaborate fact-checking and cross-checking has become, at the end of the day, it's always a threat develops, and then there are solutions for that. The DSA being one, but the work that has been done in the OSINT community and things like that. And exemplary of that, and that's why I would call it a hunch and not an analysis. If you compare the most recent presidential debate in the US, and really cleaning away all what Trump says and whatnot, but they installed very nicely, very neatly, two people who just say, we spoke to the person in that city, and the person says, it's completely wrong. Now, does that change whether his followers believe the same thing? No, it hasn't. But for me, that's not misinformation, disinformation. That's polarization, populism. That's a different thing. But I think we are beginning to catch up to that. And you actually very nicely gave the answer in the question yourself. That definitely starts with our children, and it's a very different set of critical thinking that we ourselves as parents have to start teaching our children that it's a, I would say, maybe last sentence, I think for me the main conclusion of this information age is you have to live with the ambiguity that two things can be right. Like the one thing and the opposite possibly can be right because some people believe in this and some people believe in this, and the fact is somewhat of the sum total, or at least of an overlap. And that's the concept of critical thinking we and also our children should learn, my opinion.
Very interesting input, really. So let's move to our closing remarks. Together you can answer, and your closing remarks. Maybe 2 minutes for each panelist, we're finished. So we can start with you, Mr. Hatzimihail.
Yeah, because on the misinformation, disinformation, which is a very useful distinction. Main point is what Marcel said in the end, that essentially we have to learn to live with uncertainty. And this is a problem both for the crazies and for many of the people who supposedly want to cure the craze of their craziness, including policy makers, politicians, so-called liberals, sort of like so-called progressive, etc. So this is exactly, and so the main thing, but going back to it's exactly sort of train people to be able to fact check and to look for the real thing. So I will say, I mean, we are all tempted to go into sort of, I mean, I'm tempted to TikTok essentially examples for my contracts class. But actually don't use TikTok, but sort of use YouTube. But at the same time, it's like we have, and this goes to both to the politicians and to the teachers and sort of like to us, we have to get people to read books, we have to get people to read long-form articles. Some of the more serious media, not in Cyprus, not in Greece. In Greece, we're still trying to get Kathimerini to figure out that the University of Cyprus has a library and not one of the private universities. In Cyprus, we don't even speak of that. Long-form, long reads. Because newspapers understand that at the moment where everyone wants to have instant information, including yours truly, and this is an admission of guilt, you have to get, okay, the economists, they're trying to produce the new content every day, but also their strong point is long-form analysis and patience. And you have efforts, and one of the things you do is like, if you find such news outlets, please support them. And train people to read, support fact-checkers, but at the same time, all this disinformation, there is now a disinformation fighting industry globally. It's very important that the people who do that take an absolute neutrality. I'm not a neutral person myself, but it's very important because if someone who is if someone who is supposedly fighting disinformation is caught to be promoted or is accused of promoting one side or one faction, then they lose all credibility and the entire disinformation industry loses credibility with that. And we've seen that even with the COVID pandemic, where some of the attempts to really impose what we perceive to be expert orthodoxy in some areas went maybe too far, and now I have to convince people who are very obedient that no, essentially, your breast cancer is not caused by the COVID vaccine. And these are not the people who are crazy. These were the people who are sort of, these were the serious people. So we kind of pushed to such an extent some things that now it kind of moved to the other way. And this is a big thing. So fighting disinformation is a full-time job, and misinformation also, and sort of forget the third one, and also go into Ukraine. You know, our students go to one job. You know that Prigozhin almost won a lawsuit in London because someone essentially generally suggests that he was Wagner, and he was like, "No, I'm not Wagner. You are defaming me," like no guy. Or Catherine Belton's Putin's People book was almost stopped from publication because Abramovich sued. And Abramovich in the past won. So you had this, how even tools that are there to protect truth or protect reputation, which is very important, were used in the opposite way. Now they tell students about the Abramovich lawsuit and they laugh. We speak about Prigozhin's lawsuit and we laugh, but these were used to almost bankrupt serious news outlets. And this is why as a lawyer, I mean, my natural tendency is to just go and grab the thing, but it's also afraid of it. So education is very important. And wrapping up with your own thing, 2 points. The most important thing I want to say, and I almost completely neglected, was that you have a real fragmentation between elites or so-called elites, sociological terms, and the population. And very often the elites think they speak of the population. When we speak about groups, essentially, it's almost like the German law professor speaking about Volksgeist, and they meant Roman law in Latin. But we have this kind of real disconnection at the very moment when we speak of groups. And the other thing is institutions have a moral mission. There is this Greek word agogí, which is not covered precisely by the word education. And this again, so this is the idea of institutions as moral formation. This is something about political participation is not just like an absolute good person right. Ideally, in a good university, I shouldn't care who's my rector. I could just make fun of them. If I care too much about who's my rector, something is going wrong. The same thing with my president, the same thing with my prime minister, or my parliamentarian. A system that works very well, people will not be voting too much. So there's something good about less participation. Of course, the loss of trust is a question. But I will place more emphasis not in having 17 parliaments. Now we have Pedovuli, so we have the toddlers parliament, the early youth parliament, the teenage parliament, because we have the youth parliament being in Greece, so we have like the old people parliament, the fifth age parliament, so we have this kind of deliberative or this democracy. What's the best one? Local democracy, and in a moment where Cyprus is following the bad example of other countries, including like Greece, of concentrating, have these mega municipalities, yeah, you have the village, get people involved in the neighborhood level. So essentially, neighborhood, so try, and this is something that Germany did very well, sort of get people involved in the local level. People involved in the local level, some of them will move further up there. So this is kind of, do not politicize everything, but try to get people involved in sort of like things such as like neighborhood watch on the local level, and some of them will produce your politicians eventually. Don't fabricate them by sort of like industrial production.
Marcel, your final remarks?
Yeah, thank you very much. A couple of points to take from there too. I think, I mean, all of us on the panel, maybe all of us in the room, definitely myself, I would say I'm a political nerd. So like I consume more political news than is healthy for me. Like 5 minutes before sleeping, I would still be on a podcast about something. So I have a lot of friends and family and a lot of colleagues who maybe not in my field who are interested in politics. But even in the most interested discussion I would have with them, they maybe consume politics, policies, what have you, for 1 hour combined a week. Because they read the morning newspaper, maybe they talk here or there. And I think the point we made about language is I think even bigger. It's about how do we people who work in or for politics or in any adjacent sector, how do we conceptualize it? Because we often conceptualize it from our viewpoint, which is a viewpoint of, not using the term expert, but very specialized in terms of how we gather information, how we evaluate them, and how we distribute it. That's the first point. The second point is, I think, for political parties to modernize, their North Star should be to ask themselves, why would someone join a political party? And the first thing, it is usually a very egoistic reason, but for the right reason. People want to make a difference. They want to influence something. And so if that's the reason why they join a party, you should enable them to do that at the very level they join. You know, of course, there are other peoples in there. The second thing is they want to take something away. I mean, like any group that I join, I'll join that group to bring something into that group, but I also want to take something away. And I think parties, what they can offer, because they're a huge organizational body, they can cater to a certain level of skill development. You've never organized events before. When you join us, okay, we give you the responsibility for an event, for community outreach, and you can learn, you can use our resources. And the last thing is really that all of us who are interested in politics, and I'm speaking now purely for my own introspection of the, I would say, last years, is that find out where you can get involved in politics. It's not everybody's, no thing to stand for office or to join a party, but we all have something we would want to be involved in, even if it's just to influence someone we know in a positive way who is involved. So I think, that there are many surveys, I think, all over the world where it's always, who do you trust most? And then it's the fire brigade, the policeman, the judge, and then there's a politician. What's really weird to me is yet we entrust them consistently with the most power. So there is a gap which I think we need to fill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maria?
A very quick comment on the fake news and the current voters. It's not only the responsibility of the voters, so the people, it's also the responsibility of the media. And very recently, at least in Cyprus, we had a media company, let's say, a medium, that got fined because they published fake news. So we should monitor the news, not in the sense to lose the freedom of speech. We don't need to monitor the internet, but we need to monitor AI tools. We need to train them also well, and we need to, for ourselves, to get trained on our own on how to filter the news. If something feels weird, most probably it will be weird. So we need to question every single thing that it passes through, in front of our eyes. And just to close, indeed, democracy is in crisis. We are living it, despite the age of the person. I mean, it's something that everybody live in. What we need to do to get it back is to actually think what we want, in which kind of world we want to live in. And then we will have the answer. If we want to have a world full with violence, then let it be. If we want to have a world in peace, we need to fight in a very polite manner about peace and about the freedom of people and human rights and everything that anyone needs to fight still, even in 2024. And when you see or when you hear something from young people, stay still, open your ears, open your minds, hear them, look at them. They need and they have something to say to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. And Valéria, your closing remarks?
I have to say that my closing remarks and Maria's are exactly very well tuned, because what I have to say is that at the end of the day we have to question what kind of society we want to be. One where democracy is shaped by technology, or the other way around. And if it's the other way around, if it's like technology is shaped by democracy, then we have to create the tools. And I think that public policies, regulation, they are essential for that. So, Maria mentioned, like, you have media that misbehave in Cyprus, but if you have the legislation in place, you have ways of addressing, mitigating, and trying to prevent this kind of behavior. And actually always adjusting it towards improvement. So we need to create the right guardrails to protect democracy. So thank you for the invitation. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much, Valéria. Please, everyone, give a round of applause for our dear panelists. Thank you very much. And please stay with us. In the next 5 minutes, we're going to have a panel on lobbying and public affairs in Cyprus. Thank you very much.